Blood darkened the Texas prairie grass where the mother bobcat had collapsed, but it was what Dr. Michael discovered pulsing beneath her that made him gasp in disbelief. The hybrid cubs growing in her womb weren't just biological impossibilities. They were living proof of a classified experiment that powerful people would kill to protect. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The golden prairie grasses swayed like ocean waves under the relentless Texas sun. Dr. Michael Reeves wiped sweat from his brow as he squinted across the vast expanse of the Broken Arrow Wildlife Preserve. 3 days into an unprecedented drought, and the wildlife was beginning to show signs of distress. As the lead veterinarian for the preserve's emergency response team, Michael had seen his share of nature's cruelties. But something about today felt different, a heaviness in the air that promised trouble. "Dr. Reeves, we've got a call from the North Quadrant." Emma Chen's voice crackled through his radio, her usual calm professionalism tinged with urgency. "Rangers spotted a female bobcat acting strangely near Potter's Creek. She's collapsed in the field, barely moving." Michael's pulse quickened. Bobcats were notoriously elusive creatures, masters of stealth and solitude. For one to be spotted in broad daylight, let alone collapsed in the open, meant something was seriously wrong. "Tell them I'm on my way. Any signs of trauma or illness?" he asked, already moving toward his truck, medical kit in hand. "Unclear. The ranger said she seemed disoriented before collapsing. She's not trying to flee when approached, which is..." Emma trailed off. "Highly unusual," Michael finished, starting the engine. "I'll be there in 10. As he navigated the bumpy service roads that crisscrossed the 5,000-acre preserve, Michael's mind raced through possibilities. Dehydration was likely given the heat wave, but bobcats were resilient. Disease was another option. Rabies could cause disorientation, though the symptoms didn't quite match. Perhaps poisoning from a contaminated water source. The preserve bordered farmland to the north, and despite their best efforts to maintain a buffer zone, agricultural runoff remained a constant concern. The truck bounced over a particularly deep rut, jolting Michael back to the present. He'd been working at Broken Arrow for nearly 7 years, ever since completing his veterinary residency with a specialty in wildlife medicine. The preserve had become more than a workplace. It was his mission, his purpose. Each animal that called these grasslands and forests home was under his protection, a responsibility he carried with near religious devotion. As he approached the northern quadrant, he spotted Ranger Tom Blackwell's vehicle parked at the edge of a sprawling meadow. The seasoned ranger stood a respectful distance from a tawny form lying motionless in the grass. Michael parked and grabbed his kit, heart pounding with a familiar mix of dread and determination. "Doc, glad you're here," Tom said quietly as Michael approached, his weathered face grave beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "She's over there. Hasn't moved much since we found her. Tried approaching once, but she managed a warning growl, so I backed off." Michael nodded, appreciating the ranger's caution. "How long has she been down?" "Jenkins spotted her during his morning patrol, about 2 hours ago. Said she was staggering before she finally went down." "Anyone else been notified?" "Emma's contacting state wildlife services just as protocol requires, but they said to defer to your assessment." Michael scanned the area as they spoke. The bobcat lay about 50 yards away, her spotted coat almost blending with the sun-bleached grasses despite her substantial size. Even from this distance he could see she was an impressive specimen, probably around 30 pounds, with the distinctive facial ruff of a mature female. "I'll need to get closer, see what we're dealing with," Michael said, reaching into his kit for a pair of binoculars. Through the lenses he could make out her labored breathing, the slight rise and fall of her rib cage. Her eyes were open but glazed, unfocused. Not good signs. Want me to get the tranq gun from my truck? Tom offered. Michael considered for a moment, then shook his head. Let me try to approach first. She's weak, probably won't put up much of a fight. If she seems aggressive, I'll back off and we'll try chemical immobilization. Tom looked skeptical but nodded. Your call, Doc. I'll be right behind you. With deliberate, measured steps, Michael began his approach, keeping his posture low and non-threatening. In his experience, even wild animals could sense intention. Aggression bred aggression, calm bred calm, at least in theory. The reality was often messier, marked by teeth and claws and the unpredictable desperation of a cornered animal. 30 yards away now. The bobcat's ears twitched in his direction, but she made no attempt to rise. 20 yards. Michael could see dried mucus around her nostrils, another troubling sign. 10 yards. Close enough to see the rapid, shallow quality of her breathing, the dull sheen of her coat. Easy, girl, he murmured, though he knew his voice meant nothing to her. Just another strange sound in a world suddenly gone wrong. I'm here to help. At 5 yards, the bobcat finally responded, attempting to raise her head, a weak growl vibrating in her throat. The threat display lacked conviction, a shadow of her normal defensive prowess. Michael paused, crouching lower, making himself small. That's far enough, Tom called softly from behind. She's still got some fight in her. But Michael's experienced eye caught something else, not just aggression, but fear and something more profound. A desperate pleading that transcended species. He'd seen it before in the eyes of suffering creatures, wild and domestic alike. A universal cry for help that cut through natural barriers and evolutionary distrust. She's not threatening us, Michael said, keeping his voice low and steady. She's protecting something. With exquisite slowness, he reached into his kit and withdrew a light sedative loaded in a blow dart. Not enough to fully knock her out, just enough to dull her fear and pain to make treatment possible. Sorry about this, he whispered as he raised the pipe to his lips and sent the dart into the muscle of her shoulder with a soft exhale. The bobcat flinched, but didn't have the strength to retaliate. Within minutes, her head lowered to the ground, her eyes growing heavy as the mild sedative took effect. Michael waited until her breathing slowed before approaching the final few yards, keenly aware that even a sedated predator could be dangerous. Kneeling beside her, he performed a quick visual assessment. Female, approximately 4 years old based on her size and coat condition. No obvious external injuries or broken limbs. Significant dehydration evident in her sunken eyes and poor skin elasticity. But as concerning as these findings were, they didn't explain her collapse or her protective behavior. With gentle hands, Michael palpated her abdomen, feeling for abnormalities. The bobcat growled softly but didn't resist. As his fingers pressed carefully along her belly, he felt movement beneath the fur and muscle, a shifting, a fluttering. Tom, he called, excitement rising in his voice. Bring me the portable ultrasound from my truck. Quick. While waiting for Tom to return, Michael continued his examination. Her temperature was elevated, pulse rapid. He administered a small amount of fluid subcutaneously, a stopgap measure until he could get her proper treatment. Tom returned with the ultrasound device, his expression curious. What have you found? Instead of answering, Michael applied the gel and pressed the wand to the bobcat's abdomen. The grainy black and white image on the screen confirmed his suspicion, and he let out a low whistle of surprise. She's pregnant, he said, voice hushed with wonder. Very pregnant. Look. Tom leaned in, squinting at the screen. Those are cubs, at least 4, maybe 5. Michael nodded, adjusting the wand to get a better view. And based on their size and development, she's in active labor. But something was wrong. The cubs were positioned correctly, but the mother's contractions were weak and ineffective. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and her body was failing her at the most critical moment. "She can't deliver them on her own," Michael said, the gravity of the situation settling over him. "She needs an emergency C-section or both she and the cubs will die." Tom's eyes widened. "Here, in the field?" Michael shook his head. "We need to get her to the preserve's medical facility. Now." As if understanding the urgency of their conversation, the bobcat let out a low, pitiful moan, her body tensing with another futile contraction. In that moment, looking into her pain-filled eyes, Michael made a silent promise. This fierce wild mother wouldn't face her battle alone. Whatever it took, he would see her through this. "Tom, radio Emma. Tell her to prep the surgical suite and call in any available staff. We're bringing in a mother bobcat in critical condition." Michael carefully slid his arms under the sedated animal, mindful of her vulnerable state. "And tell her we're about to attempt something that's never been done at Broken Arrow before." As he lifted the bobcat, feeling the precious weight of multiple lives in his arms, Michael knew they were racing against time. The next few hours would determine whether this wild family lived or died, and he was their only hope. The drive back to the preserve's medical center felt endless. Michael sat in the back of Tom's Ranger vehicle, the sedated bobcat cradled carefully on a blanket across his lap. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of anxiety through him as he monitored her vitals, his fingers pressed gently against her throat to track her pulse. "Faster, Tom," he urged as another weak contraction rippled through the animal's body. "She's trying to deliver." Tom pushed the accelerator, sending the truck lurching forward. 5 minutes out, Emma's got everyone scrambling. Michael nodded, his attention fixed on his patient. Wild bobcats typically sought out secluded, protected spaces to give birth. Dens under fallen trees, abandoned burrows, dense thickets impenetrable to predators. For this mother to be caught in labor in an exposed field meant something had gone catastrophically wrong with her natural instincts or physical condition. "Hang in there," he whispered, administering another small dose of fluids. The bobcat's eyes flickered, her consciousness drifting between sedation and the urgent demands of her body's natural processes. The preserve's medical center came into view, a low, modern building nestled against a backdrop of oak trees. What had started as a simple field station had evolved over the years into a fully equipped wildlife hospital, funded by a combination of state grants, private donations, and Michael's own stubborn determination to create a world-class facility in this remote corner of Texas. Emma Chen was waiting at the service entrance, her petite frame belying her commanding presence. At 33, she'd already established herself as one of the most respected wildlife biologists in the state, and as the preserve's research director, she ran the medical center with military precision. "Surgery 1 is prepped," she announced as Tom pulled up. "Dr. Alvarez happened to be on site reviewing our cougar data. She's scrubbing in." Michael's spirits lifted slightly. Sophia Alvarez was a veterinary surgeon from Texas A&M who specialized in exotic cats. Her presence was an unexpected stroke of luck. "Transport gurney?" he asked, shifting the bobcat's weight carefully. "Right here." Emma gestured to a wheeled stretcher beside her. "What's her status?" "Active labor, but too weak to deliver. Severe dehydration, possible malnutrition. No obvious injuries. At least 4 cubs visible on ultrasound." Together, they transferred the bobcat to the gurney. A low growl escaped her throat as they moved her, a ghostly remnant of her wild ferocity now diminished by exhaustion and drugs. They rushed through the building's sterile corridors, the gurney's wheels squeaking against polished concrete floors. Through the windows of Surgery 1, Michael could see Sophia Alvarez already dressed in surgical scrubs, arranging instruments on a stainless steel tray. Her dark hair was tucked neatly under a cap, her expression focused and calm. "Michael," she greeted him with a nod as they entered. "Emma briefed me. Pregnant bobcat, emergency C-section. That's right. Thanks for stepping in, Sophia. Just happened to be in the right place. Let's save this family, shall we? Michael quickly scrubbed while the two wildlife nurses on duty, Jasmine and Keith, transferred the bobcat to the operating table. Sophia examined the portable ultrasound images Michael had taken in the field, her expert eyes assessing the situation. "These cubs are full-term," she commented. "She should be capable of natural delivery. What's preventing it?" "My guess is severe dehydration and exhaustion," Michael replied, pulling on surgical gloves. "She's depleted all her resources. The contractions are too weak to progress." Sophia nodded, gesturing to the IV that Jasmine had already established. "We'll start with a fluid bolus, then move to general anesthesia. I'll handle the surgery if you'll monitor anesthesia and be ready for neonatal care." Michael agreed, relieved to have Sophia's surgical expertise. While he was competent in emergency procedures, her specialized experience with felines gave the mother and cubs their best chance. "Her temperature's 104.2, Keith reported, looking up from the monitoring equipment. "Heart rate 165, respiratory rate 28. "Febrile," Sophia noted. "Could be infection, stress, or just the labor process. Let's add broad-spectrum antibiotics to the protocol." For the next 20 minutes, they worked to stabilize the bobcat before surgery. As the fluids flowed into her veins, some color returned to her gums, and her vital signs improved marginally. But time was running out. Each failed contraction taxed her limited strength further. "She's as stable as she's going to get," Sophia finally declared. "Let's proceed with anesthesia." Michael administered the carefully calculated dose, watching as the wild mother surrendered completely to unconsciousness. With practiced efficiency, the team prepped her abdomen, shaving the tawny, spotted fur to reveal the skin beneath. "Scalpel," Sophia requested, her voice taking on the measured cadence of a surgeon in her element. The first incision revealed the cause of the bobcat's distress. "Significant dehydration of the uterine tissues," Sophia noted. "And look here, signs of placental abruption in at least one location." Michael leaned closer, concern deepening. Placental abruption, where the placenta separates prematurely from the uterine wall, was dangerous for both mother and offspring. No wonder she couldn't deliver. "She's been bleeding internally." "Not severely, but enough to weaken her," Sophia agreed. "Combined with dehydration and the stress of whatever drove her into that exposed field, she never had a chance at a normal birth." With delicate precision, Sophia extended the uterine incision. "First cub coming," she announced, her gloved hands gently extracting a tiny wet form from the womb. "Male." Michael took the kitten with reverent hands, its body smaller than his palm, immediately beginning the neonatal assessment. No spontaneous movement, no respiratory effort. The umbilical cord had been compressed, possibly for hours. His heart sank. "No vital signs," he reported quietly, still performing chest compressions with 2 fingers. "Continuing resuscitation." Sophia nodded grimly, already working to extract the second cub. "Female," she said, passing it to Jasmine, who stood ready with warming towels. Unlike its brother, this kitten responded immediately to stimulation, its miniature mouth opening in a silent cry as Jasmine rubbed it vigorously. "We've got movement," Jasmine confirmed. "Respiratory effort established." A flicker of hope ignited in the room as Sophia reached for the third cub. "Another female," she announced. This one, like the second, showed signs of life once freed from the womb. Michael continued his efforts on the firstborn male, unwilling to concede defeat, but after 5 minutes of resuscitation he had to accept the inevitable. "Time of death 1442, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the tiny body in a towel and set it aside. "One lost, but others to save." "Fourth cub coming," Sophia called. Wait. Her hands stilled, eyes widening behind her surgical mask. Michael, you need to see this. He stepped to her side, peering into the surgical field. The fourth cub was still partially enclosed in its amniotic sac, but even through the translucent membrane, the anomaly was obvious. Instead of the spotted pattern typical of bobcat kittens, this one bore distinctive dark rings on its coat. "That's not a bobcat," Michael breathed, astonishment momentarily displacing his grief over the lost kitten. "No," Sophia agreed, carefully extracting the cub and clearing its airway. "If I'm not mistaken, this is an ocelot kitten." The impossibility of the situation struck them all into momentary silence. Ocelots were critically endangered in Texas, with fewer than 50 remaining in the wild, their range restricted to the southernmost parts of the state, hundreds of miles from Broken Arrow Preserve. "How could this happen?" Emma asked, speaking for the first time since surgery began, her scientific mind already grappling with the implications. The ocelot kitten squirmed in Sophia's hands, surprisingly vigorous despite its unlikely origins. As Michael took the tiny hybrid, feeling its determined heartbeat against his palm, he knew they'd stumbled upon something unprecedented, a mystery that defied scientific explanation and would change everything they understood about these secretive wildcats. "I don't know," he admitted, watching as the kitten, against all odds, fought for its first breaths in a world unprepared for its existence. "But I intend to find out." "Last one," Sophia announced, her skilled hands extracting the fifth and final cub from the mother's womb. "Female bobcat, normal presentation." She passed the tiny form to Keith, who immediately began the stimulation and cleaning process. Michael's mind raced as he monitored the rescued cubs. 2 female bobcats, 1 male bobcat that hadn't survived, and the impossible ocelot hybrid that defied everything he thought he knew about feline biology. Bobcats and ocelots were different species, with different chromosomal numbers. Hybridization should be impossible, or at least result in a sterile offspring like a mule. Yet here was living proof to the contrary. "All cubs extracted," Sophia confirmed, now working to suture the mother's uterus. "No signs of additional placental abruption. With proper post-op care, she should recover." Emma had already pulled out her phone, typing furiously. "I'm contacting Dr. Navarro at the Endangered Cat Center in Brownsville. If anyone knows about ocelot genetics, it's him." "Good thinking," Michael nodded, dividing his attention between the cubs and their mother. "But let's keep this quiet for now. No social media, no reports to anyone outside our immediate team until we understand what we're dealing with." The implications were staggering. If viable hybridization between these species was possible, it could revolutionize conservation efforts for endangered felines, but it could also raise troubling questions about genetic manipulation, potential poaching, or even illegal breeding operations. "Agreed," Emma said, lowering her voice. "This could be sensitive from a conservation standpoint. We need to verify and understand before we go public." Sophia looked up from her surgical work, her eyes visible above her mask, creased with concentration. Theoretically, there could be natural explanations, convergent evolution in isolated populations, or perhaps a subspecies adaptation we haven't documented. But cross-species pregnancy, she shook her head. It challenges everything we know about reproductive isolation. "The mother's coming around," Jasmine warned, noting changes in the vital signs monitor. "Anesthesia's wearing off." "Almost finished," Sophia assured her, placing the final sutures. "How are the cubs doing?" Keith had arranged the 4 surviving kittens in a warming incubator brought in from the neonatal care unit. 3 showing strong vital signs. The ocelot hybrid is smaller than the others, but surprisingly vigorous. Michael moved to examine the cubs more carefully. Each was tiny, barely 4 ounces, with eyes tightly shut and ears folded against their heads. The bobcat kittens displayed the typical spotted pattern on a tawny background, while the ocelot kittens' markings were unmistakably different. Darker, more defined rosettes beginning to form around rings that would eventually develop into the signature ocelot pattern. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured, gently checking each kitten's reflexes with a gloved finger. They responded with surprising strength, tiny paws pushing back against his touch. "Neither has the scientific community, as far as I know," Emma replied, already shifting into research mode. "We'll need DNA samples from all of them, comparison studies, and detailed documentation of their development." "First priority is survival," Michael reminded her, though he shared her scientific curiosity. "These cubs would still be nursing for at least 2 months in the wild, and they'll need specialized care." Sophia finished the surgery, stepping back from the table as Jasmine began applying a protective spray to the incision site. "I'd recommend keeping Mom sedated for at least 6 hours post-op. It will give her body time to begin healing before she fully awakens and potentially becomes stressed in captivity." Michael nodded his agreement. "We'll set her up in Recovery Room 3. It's our most isolated unit, designed to minimize human contact for eventual rewilding." "And the cubs?" Sophia asked, removing her surgical gloves and mask. "They'll need round-the-clock care," Michael said, his mind already calculating feeding schedules and nutrition requirements. "Hand-rearing is risky with wild species, but we don't have a choice." "I have contacts at a wildlife sanctuary in New Mexico that successfully hand-raised bobcat orphans last year," Emma offered. "I'll reach out for their protocols." As they discussed logistics, the first post-op challenge presented itself. The mother bobcat's vital signs suddenly spiked, heart rate jumping to 180, blood pressure surging. "She's coming out of sedation faster than expected," Jasmine warned, watching the monitors, "and she's not happy." Even before she was fully conscious, the mother's wild instincts were kicking in. A low growl rumbled from her throat as her eyes fluttered, unfocused but increasingly alert. "Increase the sedative quarter dose," Michael directed, moving closer to monitor the response. "Carefully. We don't want to compromise her respiratory function." Keith administered the medication through the IV, and gradually the bobcat's vital signs stabilized again. The brief spike of activity, however, had opened a small part of her surgical incision, a thin line of blood appearing along 2 sutures. "I need to reinforce those stitches," Sophia said, quickly rescrubbing. "Hold her steady." As Sophia worked to repair the damage, Emma's phone chimed. She stepped away to take the call, her voice low but excited. When she returned, her expression was charged with nervous energy. "That was Dr. Navarro," she reported. "He's caught the first flight from Brownsville. He'll be here by evening." Michael raised an eyebrow. "That was fast. Did you tell him what we found?" "Just enough. Pregnant bobcat with potential hybrid offspring. He's bringing genetic testing equipment with him." Emma hesitated, lowering her voice further. "Michael, he said there have been rumors." "Rumors?" "Among local ranchers and wildlife officers near the border. Stories about strange cats with mixed features. Most were dismissed as misidentifications or exaggerations, but now we have physical evidence," Michael finished, looking at the tiny ocelot-marked kitten in the incubator. Its chest rose and fell with surprising strength for such an anomalous creature. Sophia finished reinforcing the sutures and stepped back, studying her patient. "She's stable enough for transport to recovery. We should move her now while the sedation is effective." With careful coordination, they transferred the mother bobcat to a specially designed recovery cage and wheeled her to the isolated room. The space was equipped with remote monitoring cameras, minimal lighting, and sound insulation to reduce stress. Even the feeding system was designed to minimize human contact, critical for an animal they hoped to eventually release back to the wild. "What about the cubs?" Jasmine asked as they settled the mother. "They'll need feeding every 2 hours." "I'll take first shift," Michael volunteered. "Emma, can you prepare the formula based on the New Mexico protocols? Keith, set up the nursery in the small isolation room. We'll want to keep them near Mom but separated until we determine if she's capable of caring for them post-recovery." As the team dispersed to their tasks, Michael found himself alone with the sedated mother Bobcat. In repose, with her fierce nature temporarily subdued, she looked almost peaceful. The steady rise and fall of her ribcage reassured him that she'd survived the immediate crisis, but greater challenges lay ahead. Wild predators did not easily accept captivity, even when it saved their lives. "What's your story?" he murmured, not touching her but standing close enough to study the unique patterns of her coat. The scars that told tales of previous battles survived. "Where did you come from, and how did you end up carrying a baby that shouldn't exist?" The Bobcat offered no answers, her secrets locked behind wild eyes temporarily closed in drug-induced sleep. But her body told part of the story. She was older than he'd initially estimated, probably closer to 6 or 7 years. Prime breeding age, but with signs of previous litters. This wasn't her first motherhood, which made her abandonment of natural birthing instincts even more puzzling. A soft knock at the door pulled Michael from his thoughts. Emma stood there, a clipboard in her hands. "Preliminary blood work is back," she said quietly. "She's got elevated white blood cell count consistent with infection, and her liver values are abnormal." "Toxicity?" "Possibly. I've sent samples for specific toxin screening, but it will take time. There's something else, though." Emma handed him the clipboard, finger pointing to a specific line on the report. Microchipping scan was positive. Michael's eyes widened. "She's been tagged before? By whom?" "Unknown. It's not a standard wildlife service chip. Different frequency, encrypted data. We can't read it with our equipment." The mystery deepened. A wild bobcat carrying an impossible hybrid offspring with an unidentifiable microchip embedded under her skin. Every answer seemed to raise 3 new questions. "Dr. Navarro's plane lands in 2 hours, Emma continued. "I'll pick him up from the regional airport." Michael nodded, his gaze returning to the sleeping bobcat. "Tell him to prepare for something unprecedented. This isn't just a scientific curiosity, Emma. I'm starting to think we've stumbled onto something much bigger." "Bigger how?" "I don't know yet," Michael admitted. "But wild bobcats don't get proprietary microchips. They don't carry ocelot babies. And they don't typically have toxins in their systems that drive them to collapse in open fields during labor." Emma's expression grew serious. "You think this was deliberate? Someone did this to her?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and laden with implications neither of them wanted to face. Before Michael could respond, the monitoring system beeped. The cubs were waking, their tiny bodies demanding the nourishment their mother temporarily couldn't provide. "We focus on keeping them alive," Michael said finally. "One step at a time. The truth will follow." As he walked toward the nursery to begin the delicate process of feeding newborn wild predators, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they'd opened a door that couldn't be closed, and whatever lay on the other side was watching them with calculated interest. The nursery had been transformed into a makeshift intensive care unit for the newborn cubs. Michael sat on a stool between the incubator and a small preparation table, carefully drawing formula into a specialized syringe fitted with a soft rubber nipple designed for wildlife rehabilitation. The mixture, a precise blend of kitten formula supplemented with additional taurine and other nutrients specific to wild felines, had been prepared according to Emma's research. "Starting with the strongest first," Michael murmured to Jasmine, who was recording every detail of the feeding process. He gently lifted one of the female bobcat kittens, supporting her tiny body in his palm. At just a few hours old, she weighed less than the average apple, her spotted fur still damp in places, eyes firmly sealed shut against the world. The kitten squirmed in his hand, mouth opening in a silent mewl that tugged at something primal in his chest. Wild or not, newborns awakened protective instincts that transcended species barriers. With practiced gentleness, he guided the nipple to her mouth, watching as instinct took over, and she began to suckle weakly. "Good girl," he encouraged, monitoring the amount she consumed. "Just a little more." One by one, he fed each surviving cub, leaving the ocelot hybrid for last. This kitten was smaller than its bobcat siblings, but surprisingly vigorous, latching onto the nipple with determined strength. "He's a fighter," Jasmine observed, making notes on her tablet. Heart rate and body temperature both strong. Michael nodded, studying the unusual markings that were already developing on the kitten's coat. The distinctive pattern was unmistakable to anyone familiar with wild cats, the beginnings of the complex rosettes that characterized ocelot fur rather than the simpler spots of a bobcat. "What are we going to name them?" Jasmine asked, her voice low as if the sleeping mother in the next room might overhear. Michael hesitated. Naming implied attachment, and attachment complicated the already challenging process of rehabilitation and release. But tracking 4 nearly identical cubs required identification. For now, just Alpha, Beta, Gamma for the bobcat females, he decided, and Omega for this little anomaly. Omega, Jasmine repeated, recording it. The last letter, for the last born. And potentially the last of his kind, Michael added, carefully returning Omega to the incubator, whatever his kind turns out to be. The exterior door opened, and Emma stepped in, accompanied by a slender man with salt and pepper hair and rectangular glasses that magnified his alert brown eyes. Despite the late hour and presumed hasty departure from Brownsville, Dr. Javier Navarro was impeccably dressed in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, his bearing suggesting the military background Emma had once mentioned. "Dr. Reeves," Navarro extended his hand, his accent subtle but detectable. "Emma has told me about your extraordinary discovery. I came as quickly as possible." Michael shook the offered hand. "Thank you for responding so promptly, Dr. Navarro. We're in uncharted territory here. Javier, please." His gaze had already shifted to the incubator, the scientist's curiosity evident in his posture. "May I?" Michael nodded, stepping aside as Navarro approached the cubs. His examination was thorough, yet gentle, experienced hands carefully assessing each kitten before lingering on Omega. He said nothing for several long moments, then straightened, removing his glasses to polish them thoughtfully. "In 30 years of ocelot conservation, I have never seen anything like this," he finally said, his voice calm but underlaid with excitement. "The markings are unmistakable, yet this kitten emerged from a bobcat mother." "Is it possible?" Emma pressed. "Hybridization between the species." Navarro replaced his glasses, his expression guarded. "Theoretically, no. The chromosomal differences should prevent viable offspring. Yet the evidence is before us." He gestured to the incubator. "I brought equipment to run preliminary DNA analysis. With your permission, I'd like to take samples immediately." Michael hesitated only briefly. Navarro's reputation in conservation circles was impeccable. His work with the endangered ocelot population in South Texas widely respected. If anyone could be trusted with this discovery, it was him. "Of course, we've already collected blood samples from all cubs and the mother." While Navarro set up his portable analysis equipment in the preserve's lab, Michael checked on the mother bobcat. She remained sedated but stable, her vital signs gradually improving. The surgery site looked clean, with no further bleeding. Small victories. "How long will the analysis take?" Michael asked when he returned to find Navarro already processing the samples. Preliminary results in a few hours. Comprehensive genomic sequencing would require more sophisticated equipment than what I've brought. Navarro worked with efficient precision, his movements economical. While we wait, perhaps you could show me where the mother was found. The environmental context might provide valuable clues. Michael glanced at his watch, nearly midnight. First light would be better. The preserve can be treacherous in darkness, even with guides. Navarro nodded, though Michael detected a flicker of impatience quickly masked. Of course, safety first. Then perhaps we could discuss the microchip Emma mentioned. The microchip. In the urgency of caring for the newborns, Michael had almost forgotten this equally puzzling aspect of the mystery. We haven't been able to read it, Emma explained, bringing up the scanner's diagnostic screen on a nearby computer. The frequency is unusual and the data appears encrypted. Navarro studied the screen, his expression thoughtful. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the keyboard. Emma stepped aside, allowing him access. His fingers moved rapidly over the keys, inputting commands that suggested a familiarity with systems more sophisticated than standard wildlife tracking databases. "Interesting," he murmured after several minutes. "This encryption protocol isn't used by any North American wildlife service I'm familiar with." "Could it be from Mexico?" Michael suggested. "Perhaps she crossed the border." "Possible, but unlikely." Navarro sat back, his eyes never leaving the screen. Mexican conservation authorities use standardized international protocols for endangered species tracking. This is something else. A subtle tension had entered the room, unspoken questions hanging in the air. Michael caught Emma's eye, noting her slight frown as she watched Navarro work. "There's something else you should know," Michael said, making a decision. "The mother shows signs of possible toxicity. Early blood work indicates abnormal liver values consistent with certain chemical exposures." Navarro's hands stilled on the keyboard. "What kind of chemicals?" "We're still waiting on comprehensive screening, but the pattern is consistent with certain synthetic compounds, not typically encountered in natural environments." The implication hung heavily between them. Navarro removed his glasses again, pinching the bridge of his nose in a gesture that seemed more calculated than natural. "Dr. Reeves." "Michael," he began carefully, "I believe we may be looking at something more significant than an anomalous natural hybridization." "You mean deliberate intervention? Genetic manipulation?" "It's premature to draw conclusions," Navarro cautioned, though his tone suggested he'd already formed theories of his own. "But in my work with endangered cats, I've encountered rumors. Underground breeding operations attempting to create exotic hybrids for the illegal pet trade. Private collectors willing to pay hundreds of thousands for unique specimens." The thought turned Michael's stomach. Treating wild animals like designer accessories. "Precisely," Navarro agreed. "Though if that's what we're dealing with, this situation is unusually sophisticated. Most illegal breeding operations are crude, with high mortality rates. This mother and her cubs, despite the complications, show signs of careful veterinary oversight." Emma, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke. "Are you suggesting someone released her deliberately? Why would they abandon such a valuable specimen?" Navarro spread his hands in a gesture of uncertainty that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps she escaped." The implications of this theory sent a chill through the room. If the Bobcat had escaped from a sophisticated illegal breeding operation, their discovery might have much broader ramifications, and potentially dangerous ones. "We should contact wildlife law enforcement," Michael decided. "This could fall under federal jurisdiction if endangered species are involved." "I would recommend discretion," Navarro countered smoothly. "At least until we have conclusive evidence. Premature reports could alert the very people who might be responsible. Michael wanted to argue but was interrupted by a soft beep from the monitoring system. The mother bobcat was showing signs of waking from sedation earlier than expected. Again, her metabolism seemed to process the drugs at an unusual rate. "I need to check on her," Michael said, already moving toward the door. "Emma, stay with Dr. Navarro and help with whatever he needs. Jasmine, the cubs will need another feeding in 30 minutes. As he hurried down the corridor toward the recovery room, Michael couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The pieces of this puzzle weren't fitting together in any familiar pattern, and Navarro's arrival, while providing some answers, had only deepened the mystery. Outside the window, the vast Texas night pressed against the glass, hiding whatever secrets lay scattered across the preserve. Somewhere out there, perhaps, were answers, and Michael had the unsettling feeling they were running out of time to find them. The recovery room was dimly lit, designed to minimize stress for wild patients. Michael entered quietly, already noting the bobcat's increased respiratory rate on the monitor. Her paws twitched slightly, first signs of emerging consciousness. He checked the IV line, still secure, delivering the carefully calibrated medications that walked the fine line between keeping her comfortable and completely sedated. "You're fighting it, aren't you?" he murmured, maintaining a safe distance from the cage. Wild predators were most dangerous when waking from sedation, confused, frightened, and acting purely on instinct. The bobcat's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, muscles tensing beneath her fur. Her eyes opened briefly, unfocused gold gleaming in the low light before closing again. Michael noted the reaction in her chart, adding it to the growing list of unusual responses. Most wild animals required higher doses of sedatives than domestic ones, but this bobcat was metabolizing the drugs at a rate he'd never seen before, almost as if her system had been conditioned to process them. A soft knock at the door drew his attention. Keith stood there, expression tight with urgency. "You need to see this," he said, voice low. "Dr. Navarro's preliminary results are in." Michael glanced back at the bobcat. "She's becoming active. Increase the sedative by 5% and monitor closely. I'll be back soon." In the lab, the atmosphere had changed. Charged with attention, Michael felt immediately upon entering. Emma stood with arms crossed, her posture rigid as she stared at a computer screen. Navarro sat before it, still impeccably composed despite the late hour, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitor. "What did you find?" Michael asked, moving to see the screen. Navarro gestured to the genetic markers displayed in colorful bands across the display. "Confirmation that Omega is indeed a hybrid, but not a simple first-generation cross as we might have expected." "Meaning?" "The genomic structure shows sophisticated recombination patterns." Navarro highlighted a sequence. "Here and here. These aren't random mutations or natural hybridization events. The markers have been precisely aligned." Emma's voice was flat. "He's saying Omega was genetically engineered." The words landed like physical blows. Michael stared at the screen, though the technical details of genetic sequencing were beyond his expertise. "That's impossible. The technology doesn't exist." "Not in the public domain," Navarro agreed carefully. "But theoretical frameworks for interspecies genetic compatibility have been discussed in research circles for years." "Discussed," Emma emphasized, "not implemented. The ethical constraints alone." "Ethics don't constrain everyone equally," Navarro interrupted, his tone suddenly harder, "especially when the potential profits are astronomical." Michael's mind raced, trying to process the implications. "If what you're saying is true, someone has made a breakthrough in genetic engineering that's years beyond current published capabilities, and they're using it to create designer pets?" "Perhaps not just pets." Navarro removed his glasses, rubbing them with a cloth in what Michael now recognized as a habitual gesture when organizing his thoughts. Consider the military applications. Predators with enhanced capabilities, strength, speed, sensory perception, all packaged in bodies evolved over millions of years for stealth and killing efficiency. The suggestion sent a cold current down Michael's spine. That's science fiction. 10 years ago, so was CRISPR gene editing, Navarro countered. Science advances fastest when funded by those with specific interests and unlimited resources. Michael glanced at Emma, noting the tight set of her jaw. She didn't appear surprised by Navarro's revelations, which meant they'd discuss theories while Michael was checking on the mother Bobcat. The question was, how much had Navarro known before he even arrived? "There's more," Emma said, meeting Michael's gaze with significance. "Show him the microchip data." Navarro switched screens, revealing a complex series of code strings. "I managed to partially decrypt the embedded data. It's not just an identification chip, it's a comprehensive biomonitoring system. Temperature, hormone levels, heart rate, even geolocation tracking. Remote monitoring of a valuable test subject," Emma added, her scientific detachment barely masking her disgust. Michael felt sick. So she wasn't released or escaped by accident. "Unlikely," Navarro agreed. "My theory, she was deliberately allowed to leave, a field test of both her survival capabilities and the monitoring system. And the pregnancy. Almost certainly deliberate as well. The question is whether her collapse was anticipated or if something went wrong with their experiment." The pieces were aligning into a picture more disturbing than Michael had imagined. Not just illegal breeding, but sophisticated genetic engineering, remote monitoring, and field testing of the results, all happening in his preserve, under the noses of conventional wildlife authorities. "We need to contact federal agencies," Michael decided. "Fish and Wildlife Service, FBI. "And tell them what?" Navarro challenged. "That we have evidence of classified-level genetic technology being used on endangered species without knowing who's involved?" He shook his head. "Consider the politics. Ocelots are endangered on both sides of the border. Bilateral conservation agreements, research permits, cross-border jurisdiction. By the time the bureaucracy sorts itself out, whoever is behind this will have removed all evidence." "So what do you suggest?" Michael demanded, increasingly unsettled by Navarro's apparent familiarity with both the technology and the potential response patterns. "A trap," Navarro said simply. "The mother's tracking chip is still active. Whoever implanted it knows exactly where she is. They'll come looking for their investment." Emma's eyes widened. "You want to use her as bait? That's completely unethical." "They're already coming," Navarro insisted. "The question is whether we'll be prepared when they do." The conversation was interrupted by Keith's urgent return. "Dr. Reeves, the mother's fully awake and the sedatives aren't working anymore. She's becoming aggressive." Michael cursed under his breath. "I need to deal with this. We'll continue this discussion after." "I'll help," Navarro offered, rising smoothly. "I have experience with handling stressed felines." Michael wanted to refuse, but couldn't justify it. Every hand might be needed if the Bobcat became truly aggressive. "Fine. Emma, check on the cubs. Make sure they're secure." The mother Bobcat was indeed fully conscious when they reached the recovery room. She paced the confines of her enclosure with agitated energy that belied her recent surgery, yellow eyes blazing with a wild intelligence that fixed on them immediately as they entered. A low, rumbling growl vibrated from her chest. "Remarkable recovery rate," Navarro observed, studying her with clinical interest. "The incision site should be causing significant pain, yet she's moving fluidly." Michael approached the monitoring equipment, reviewing the vital signs. Temperature elevated, heart rate accelerated but strong. No signs of shock or infection. Despite the concerning situation, He couldn't help but admire the bobcat's resilience. The growling intensified as Navarro moved closer to the cage. The bobcat's reaction was immediate and visceral, her fur bristling, teeth bared in a defensive snarl directed specifically at him. "She recognizes you," Michael realized with sudden clarity. "Or at least she recognizes something about you." Navarro's expression remained neutral, but his posture subtly shifted, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Unlikely. I've never encountered this specific animal." "She disagrees," Michael noted, watching the focused intensity of the bobcat's aggression, so clearly targeted at Navarro rather than generally displayed. In his years of wildlife work, he'd learned to trust animal instincts. They perceived things humans missed, responded to threats before they became obvious. Before Navarro could respond, the lights in the recovery room flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the battery-powered emergency lights on the medical equipment. Seconds later, those too went dark as a complete power failure engulfed the facility. "What the hell?" Michael fumbled for his phone, activating the flashlight function. In its narrow beam, the bobcat's eyes reflected an eerie green, her growls now continuous and threatening. The preserve had backup generators that should have kicked in automatically. Their failure suggested something beyond a simple power outage. "We need to check the security system," Michael said, already moving toward the door, concern for the vulnerable cubs overriding all other considerations. Navarro's hand closed around his arm, surprisingly strong. "Wait." His voice had changed, harder, commanding. "Listen." In the silence, broken only by the bobcat's growls, Michael heard it, the soft crunch of tires on gravel outside the building, the muted thrum of vehicle engines being cut. No headlights pierced the windows. "They're here," Navarro said quietly, releasing Michael's arm. "And they're not coming through the front door." The bobcat suddenly threw herself against the cage with unexpected force, nearly toppling it from its stand. Not trying to escape, Michael realized, but trying to warn them or possibly reach Navarro her perceived threat. "Who are you, really?" Michael demanded, backing toward the door, putting distance between himself and Navarro. "And what do you know about this?" In the dim light of the phone's beam, Navarro's face transformed, the scholarly demeanor replaced by something colder, more calculated. "Someone who understands what we're dealing with better than you do, Dr. Reeves." He reached into his jacket, withdrawing what Michael initially thought was a phone but recognized with a surge of adrenaline as a small caliber pistol. "And right now, your only chance of keeping those cubs alive." Time compressed into crystalline moments of perfect clarity. Michael's training took over, years of emergency response conditioning his reactions. First priority, protect the vulnerable. Second, assess the threat. Third, find a way to communicate with the outside world. "The cubs," he said, voice steady despite the pistol aimed in his general direction. "We need to secure them." Navarro nodded curtly. "They're what they've come for, particularly Omega." "And you know this how?" The question hung between them, but footsteps in the corridor demanded more immediate attention. Navarro gestured with the gun toward a supply closet at the back of the recovery room. "In there. Now." Michael hesitated, unwilling to turn his back on the armed man, but the approaching footsteps left little choice. He backed into the closet, Navarro following and pulling the door nearly closed, leaving just enough space to observe the room. The bobcat had gone silent, her body pressed low to the floor of her enclosure, ears flattened in the posture of a predator preparing to strike. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness as two figures entered the recovery room. They moved with the precision of military training, weapons drawn, not standard firearms, but what appeared to be tranquilizer rifles with sophisticated scopes. Their faces were obscured by balaclavas, bodies covered in tactical gear devoid of identifying markings. "Subject located," One spoke into a communication device, voice muffled. "Recovery room as predicted by tracker." "Vital signs," came the response, audible through the device's speaker. "Visual confirmation of consciousness and mobility. Surgical intervention appears successful." The second figure approached the Bobcat's cage cautiously, studying the monitoring equipment that remained dark in the power outage. "She's burned through the sedation faster than expected. Metabolic enhancement functioning as designed." The clinical detachment in their voices chilled Michael to the core. These weren't poachers or black market animal traders. They spoke like scientists or military personnel evaluating an asset. The Bobcat watched them with unnerving focus, her growls now silenced, conserving energy for what might come. "What about the offspring?" the voice through the communicator demanded. "Not present in this room. Searching adjacent areas. Priority acquisition is subject Omega. Maternal subject and standard offspring are secondary objectives." In the closet, Navarro's expression hardened. He leaned close to Michael's ear, his whisper barely audible. "They'll find the nursery within minutes. We need to move the cubs." "Why should I trust you?" Michael whispered back. "For all I know, you're with them." "If I were, I'd have already handed you and the cubs over," Navarro replied with cold logic. "I need your help to get them out of here safely, and you need mine to survive the next hour." The intruders moved toward the door, continuing their methodical search. As soon as they were out of sight, Navarro pushed the closet door open. "We have approximately 3 minutes before they circle back." The power outage was designed to disable security and communications, but they'll have cut the backup systems and phone lines as well. "Satellite phone in my office," Michael said. Decision made. Whatever Navarro's true agenda, he clearly didn't want the intruders to get the cubs. But the nursery is closer. "You get the cubs, I'll hold them off." Navarro checked his pistol with practiced efficiency. "Where can you take them?" Michael's mind raced through options. The preserve had numerous field stations and observation blinds scattered throughout its acreage, but most would be obvious targets for a search. "There's an old groundskeeper's cabin near the eastern boundary. It's not on current maps." "Good. I'll meet you there if I can." Navarro handed Michael a small object, a flash drive. "Everything I know about the project is on here. If I don't make it, get it to someone you trust in federal law enforcement. Not local. They could be compromised." Questions crowded Michael's throat, but there was no time. He nodded once, pocketing the drive, then moved to the Bobcat's enclosure. Despite her aggression earlier, she had gone eerily still, watching him with those intelligent golden eyes. "I'll try to come back for you," he promised, knowing she couldn't understand but feeling the obligation nonetheless. The corridor was dark but empty, emergency exit signs providing minimal illumination. Michael moved silently toward the nursery, straining to locate the intruders by sound. A crash from the direction of the main laboratory suggested they were searching there first, a small mercy that bought precious seconds. Emma met him at the nursery door, her face pale in the darkness but composed. She'd placed the cubs in a portable transport incubator, standard equipment for field rescues that could operate on battery power. "2 men with weapons," Michael explained rapidly. "They've cut communications and power. They're after the cubs." Emma nodded, unsurprised, which struck Michael as odd until she spoke. "Navarro warned me this might happen. He told me to prepare the cubs for transport while you were checking on the mother." So Navarro had anticipated this, or known it was coming. The revelation deepened the mystery of the man's true identity and motivations. "We need to get to the east cabin," Michael said, taking one handle of the transport incubator while Emma took the other. "Through the service exit." "What about the mother?" Michael hesitated. "We can't safely transport her in her current state. Navarro is dealing with the intruders." Emma's expression tightened at the implication, but she asked no further questions as they navigated through the darkened building. The service exit led to a loading area typically used for supply deliveries and wildlife transport. Michael paused at the door, scanning the area before determining it was clear. "My Jeep's parked behind the maintenance shed," Emma whispered. "Keys are in my pocket." They moved as quickly as they dared across the open space, the transport incubator between them. Inside, the 4 tiny cubs remained remarkably quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. The shed loomed ahead, a deeper patch of darkness against the night sky. A gunshot cracked through the stillness, not the muted thump of a tranquilizer rifle, but the sharp report of Navarro's pistol, followed by shouting from inside the building. Michael's pulse hammered in his throat as they reached the Jeep, carefully loading the incubator into the back seat. "You drive," he told Emma, making another decision. "Get the cubs to the cabin. I'm going back for the mother." "Michael, that's insane," Emma protested. "You heard the shot." "I can't leave her," he cut her off. "Those people, whatever they've done to her, whatever they want with her and the cubs, it's not for their welfare. I took an oath to protect animals in my care." Emma's argument was interrupted by the beam of a flashlight sweeping the area near the building's entrance. "We don't have time to debate this," she hissed, sliding into the driver's seat. "I'll take the main road, then cut through the fire break to reach the cabin. If you're really doing this, at least take this." She pressed something cold and heavy into his hand, a revolver from the glove compartment, kept for protection against aggressive wildlife during field research. Michael stared at it, the weight unfamiliar and unwelcome. "They're not using tranquilizers on people, Michael," Emma said grimly. "Just come back alive." Before he could respond, she started the engine and pulled away, keeping the headlights off until she reached the access road. Michael tucked the revolver into his jacket pocket, feeling its presence like a burning coal against his side as he crept back toward the building. The service door had locked behind them, security protocols that functioned even during power outages, forcing him to circle around to find another entry point. As he rounded the corner of the building, a figure emerged suddenly from the shadows. Michael recoiled, hand instinctively moving toward the revolver, but froze when he recognized Navarro's silhouette. Blood darkened the scientist's left shoulder, his previously immaculate shirt now torn and stained. "They've called for backup," he said without preamble, voice tight with pain. "We have minutes, not hours." "The mother? Already gone," Navarro cut him off. "They've tranquilized and removed her. Their primary team is pursuing the cubs, 3-man unit, night vision equipped, tracking the chip signatures." "The cubs have chips too?" Michael felt sick. "Implanted in utero, based on what I overheard. Where's Emma taking them?" "East cabin." Michael studied Navarro's injury. "You need medical attention." "Later." Navarro's eyes, hard as obsidian in the darkness, fixed on Michael's. "They weren't expecting resistance. That gives us a small advantage, but we need to move. Now." "Who are you?" Michael demanded, the question burning more urgently than ever. "Really?" Navarro's laugh held no humor. "Someone who made the mistake of developing a conscience too late in the game, Doctor. Now let's go save those cubs before my former colleagues correct that error permanently." They moved through the darkness like shadows, 2 men united by circumstance rather than trust. Michael led the way, his knowledge of the preserve's terrain guiding them along game trails and natural pathways invisible to those without intimate familiarity with the land. Navarro followed, his breathing controlled despite the injury, his movements betraying military training that no academic credentials could explain. "We need to get off this trail," Navarro said after they'd covered nearly half a mile. "They'll be using thermal imaging to track us." Michael veered toward a shallow creek that cut through the preserve, the water a black ribbon under the starlight. "Water will mask our heat signatures temporarily." They waded into the cool current, moving upstream to further confuse any pursuit. The night had come alive around them, nocturnal creatures conducting their business with indifference to the human drama unfolding in their midst. An owl called from overhead, its hunting interrupted by their passage. "The facility you worked for," Michael said, keeping his voice low. "What exactly were they trying to create with these animals?" Navarro was silent for several steps, seemingly weighing how much to reveal. "It began as legitimate research," he finally replied. "The Felidae Genetic Preservation Initiative, studying ways to protect endangered cat species through genetic repositories, reproductive technology, strengthened immune responses to common diseases." Noble goals. "Most nightmares begin with good intentions, Doctor." Navarro winced as his injured shoulder brushed against an overhanging branch. 3 years ago, private military contractors became interested in our work. They saw applications beyond conservation. "Military applications," Michael supplied, remembering their earlier conversation. "Enhanced predators. Imagine soldiers with the night vision capabilities of an ocelot, the stealth of a jaguar, the raw power of a tiger, all packaged in human form." Navarro's voice had taken on a distant quality. Genetic enhancement without the ethical constraints of human testing. Using endangered species as test subjects provided perfect cover. Who would question extensive genetic research on animals already subject to conservation efforts? The creek deepened, forcing them to climb onto the opposite bank. In the distance, Michael could make out lights moving through the preserve, flashlights systematically sweeping the grounds in a search pattern. "How did you get involved?" he asked, leading them into a dense thicket that offered concealment. "I was recruited from the University of São Paulo. My work on feline genomics made me valuable. The money was exceptional, the resources unlimited." Navarro's voice held no pride, only resignation. "By the time I understood what my research was truly funding, I was already compromised. And now I'm trying to undo some of the damage." He gestured toward the direction of the cabin. "Those cubs represent the most advanced success of the program, particularly Omega. He's not just a Bobcat ocelot hybrid. He carries genetic markers from 5 different feline species, each selected for specific traits." The revelation staggered Michael. "That's impossible." 2 years ago it was. The breakthrough came when we stopped trying to splice adult genes and instead manipulated embryonic stem cells to accept multiple genetic expressions without rejection. Navarro stopped, holding up a hand in warning as they both heard the distant whine of an engine. "ATV, they're expanding the search perimeter." They froze, pressing deeper into the thicket until the sound faded. Michael's mind raced, processing the implications of Navarro's confession. The mother, was she engineered too? First generation, enhanced strength, metabolism, healing capabilities. She was meant to be a surrogate only, but she bonded with the embryos in unexpected ways, developed maternal instincts stronger than anticipated. Something like admiration crept into Navarro's voice. She escaped 3 times. The 3rd time they decided to use it as a field test, implanting tracking devices to monitor her progress. And when she went into labor, the stress triggered complications the researchers hadn't anticipated. Her enhanced metabolism meant she burned through her energy reserves too quickly. Navarro's expression darkened. They were monitoring her the entire time, watching her struggle, collecting data. They only moved in when you found her, an unexpected variable in their experiment. Disgust and anger roiled in Michael's gut. Animals treated as disposable test subjects, their suffering recorded as mere data points. It violated everything he believed about the relationship between humans and wildlife. "The east cabin is about a mile ahead," he said, refocusing on their immediate goal. "If Emma made it there safely, we can..." A sharp crack echoed through the forest, a branch breaking under weight too heavy to be wildlife. Both men dropped instinctively, pressing themselves against the earth. Through the underbrush, Michael glimpsed a figure moving with predatory precision, the outline of a tactical rifle visible against the night sky. One operative, Navarro breathed, barely audible. Flanking position. The others will be closing from different angles. Michael felt the weight of the revolver in his pocket, a solution he was deeply reluctant to embrace. Navarro seemed to sense his hesitation. "I'll create a diversion," he whispered. "Head northeast. There's a ravine that will give you cover. Get to the cabin and protect the cubs." Before Michael could protest, Navarro had silently extracted himself from the thicket, moving with a grace that belied his injury. Seconds later, a crash and shout erupted from 50 yards west, Navarro deliberately drawing attention to himself away from Michael's position. The operative responded immediately, turning toward the disturbance. Michael seized the opportunity, sliding backward through the underbrush before rising into a crouched run in the opposite direction. The forest floor was treacherous in the darkness, roots and holes threatening to twist an ankle or worse, but the greater danger lay behind him. Another shout, followed by the distinctive pop of Navarro's pistol. No answering fire from the tactical rifle. They wanted Navarro alive, Michael realized, for interrogation or because he knew too much. Either possibility suggested Navarro's betrayal of the program was recent, his value still high to his former employers. The ravine appeared ahead, a jagged tear in the earth that provided both cover and a natural pathway toward the eastern boundary. Michael half slid down its slope, using exposed roots to control his descent. At the bottom, he oriented himself by the stars visible through the canopy gap, then continued northeast at a faster pace. The cabin materialized from the darkness like a mirage, a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. No lights burned in its windows, but Michael recognized Emma's Jeep parked behind a stand of juniper trees, carefully concealed from aerial view. He approached cautiously, scanning for signs of the remaining operatives. Finding none, he circled to the cabin's rear entrance, a weathered door reinforced with metal banding, installed years ago when the structure was still used for equipment storage. 3 soft knocks, pause, 2 more, the pattern he and Emma had established during previous field emergencies. The door opened a crack, Emma's eye visible in the narrow space before she pulled it wider. "Michael," she breathed, relief evident. "I thought..." Her expression changed as she registered his solitary arrival. "Navarro?" "Creating a diversion," Michael replied grimly, slipping inside. "They're hunting us with thermal imaging and night vision, at least 3 operatives that we know of." The cabin's interior was Spartan, a single room with minimal furnishings left from its days as a groundskeeper's residence. Emma had positioned the transport incubator on an old table, rigging a makeshift warming system using emergency heat packs. "The cubs?" Michael moved immediately to check them. "Stable, but they'll need proper feeding soon." Emma secured the door behind him. "I've got formula, but not the specialized equipment from the lab." Michael examined each tiny form through the incubator's clear top. Despite the trauma of their hasty evacuation, all 4 appeared to be breathing normally, their miniature bodies curled together for warmth and comfort. "Navarro told me about them," he said quietly. "About what they really are." Emma's face remained carefully neutral. "How much did he reveal?" The question carried weight beyond simple curiosity. Michael studied his colleague with sudden wariness. "Enough to understand why they're being hunted. What do you know, Emma?" She hesitated, then moved to a worn backpack in the corner, withdrawing a tablet computer. "Navarro sent me encrypted files while you were with the mother Bobcat. Genetic profiles, research protocols, project objectives." Her fingers tapped the screen, bringing up complex diagrams of DNA structures. What they've done goes beyond illegal, Michael. It's transformative. If these cubs survive to maturity, especially Omega, they'd represent a breakthrough in genetic engineering, Michael finished. One that could be weaponized. Emma nodded soberly. The question is, whose side is Navarro really on? Is he trying to stop this research or steal it? Before Michael could respond, a low, steady beeping emanated from the transport incubator, an alarm indicating changes in the cub's vital signs. He rushed to check them, finding all four suddenly restless, their tiny bodies twitching in distress. What's happening? Emma moved beside him, concern etching her features. Michael's trained eye noted the synchronized nature of their distress, all responding to the same stimulus simultaneously. It's almost like they're reacting to... A mechanical whirring sound from above interrupted him, the distinctive rhythm of helicopter rotors approaching rapidly from the east. "They found us," Emma whispered, face pale in the darkness. "But how?" "We disabled the tracking chips as soon as we arrived." Michael looked down at the cubs, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. Not all of them. There must be secondary implants. He met Emma's gaze, determination hardening his resolve. "We need to move again. Now." Outside, the helicopter's searchlight cut through the canopy, a harsh white beam scanning the forest floor in tightening circles around their location. The hunt was intensifying, and their options for escape were rapidly dwindling. "The cellar," Emma said suddenly, moving to a worn rug in the corner and yanking it aside to reveal a trapdoor. "This place was built during Prohibition. Bootleggers used it as a way station." Michael blinked in surprise. "How do you know this?" "I did my master's thesis on historical land use in conservation areas," she replied, straining to lift the heavy wooden door. "Spent months in county archives. The original plans showed a root cellar with a drainage tunnel that leads to the creek bed." Hope flickered as Michael helped her pull the trapdoor open, revealing a narrow wooden ladder descending into darkness. The helicopter's searchlight swept across the cabin's windows, its beam penetrating the threadbare curtains in blinding flashes. "Take the cubs down," Michael instructed, carefully lifting the transport incubator. "I'll get the supplies." Emma descended first, accepting the precious cargo as Michael passed it down. The cellar smelled of damp earth and time, its darkness absolute until Emma activated her phone's flashlight, revealing a space barely tall enough to stand in, with rough stone walls and a dirt floor. "The tunnel should be behind that wall," she said, pointing to a section that looked marginally newer than the rest. "Help me find a way to open it." Michael gathered the emergency backpack and formula supplies, then joined Emma in examining the wall. His fingers traced the edges of the stones, seeking inconsistencies. "Here," he said finally, feeling a slight give in one of the larger rocks. "There's some kind of mechanism." The stone pivoted under pressure, triggering a release that allowed a section of the wall to swing inward with a groan of protesting metal. Beyond lay a narrow passage, its ceiling reinforced with timber supports that had somehow survived nearly a century of neglect. "We need to block the trapdoor," Emma said, practical even in crisis. "Slow them down." Michael nodded, scanning the cellar. An old wooden shelf unit stood against one wall, its surfaces covered with dust and abandoned mason jars. He tipped it over directly beneath the trapdoor, creating an obstacle that wouldn't stop determined pursuers but might buy precious minutes. "Let's move," he urged, taking one handle of the incubator while Emma took the other. "The cubs are still in distress. We need to find those secondary implants." The tunnel was barely wide enough for them to walk side by side with the incubator between them. Emma's phone light created a small bubble of visibility in the consuming darkness, revealing cobwebs and the occasional scurrying movement of disturbed rodents. The cubs' distress seemed to intensify as they progressed, their tiny bodies trembling violently. "It doesn't make sense," Michael muttered, his scientific mind grappling with the puzzle even as they fled. If these are tracking implants, why would they trigger a physical response in the cubs? "Maybe they're not just tracking devices," Emma suggested grimly. "Maybe they're control mechanisms." The implication chilled Michael to the core. "You think they can remotely trigger physiological responses?" If Navarro wasn't exaggerating about their technological capabilities, it's possible. A way to ensure the animals never truly escape their control, even in the wild. They reached a junction where the tunnel split, one path continuing straight, while the other angled upward. "Creek bed or surface?" Michael asked, deferring to Emma's historical knowledge. "Surface," she decided after a moment's hesitation. "The creek bed would be too obvious if they know about this tunnel system." The upward path grew steeper, forcing them to brace themselves against the walls as they climbed. The cubs' distress had evolved into pitiful mewling cries that echoed in the confined space. Above them, through the timber supports, Michael could hear the helicopter's rotors moving away, either widening the search or repositioning for ground teams to move in. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes, they encountered another barrier, a rusted metal door set into the tunnel's ceiling. Emma braced the incubator while Michael pushed against it, decades of corrosion giving way under his desperate strength. The door swung upward, revealing a star-filled sky and the welcome breath of fresh air. They emerged into a small clearing surrounded by juniper trees, the cabin now invisible behind them. In the distance, the helicopter's searchlight methodically swept the forest, moving in a grid pattern away from their position. "We need to examine the cubs now," Michael said, setting down the incubator in the shelter of a large boulder. "If there are secondary implants, they must be removed." Emma nodded, producing a small first aid kit from her backpack. "I don't have surgical equipment." "Neither do I," Michael admitted, "but we can't leave those devices in them." With gentle hands, he lifted each cub from the incubator, examining them carefully under Emma's phone light. Their distress continued unabated, tiny bodies shaking, eyes still tightly closed, but faces contorted in what could only be described as pain. "There," Emma said suddenly, pointing to a nearly invisible raised spot at the base of Omega's skull, hidden beneath the fur. "It's not on the others." Michael examined the spot, feeling a hard object no larger than a grain of rice beneath the skin. "Only Omega has one. That's why they're all reacting. They're responding to his distress." Some kind of empathic response, Emma wondered. That would be unprecedented in felines this young. "Everything about these cubs is unprecedented," Michael reminded her. He steeled himself for what needed to be done. "Hold him steady. This will hurt him, but leaving it in could be worse." Emma cradled the tiny hybrid, murmuring soothing words that meant nothing to the cub but seemed to steady her own nerves. Using a sterilized needle from the first aid kit, Michael carefully pierced the skin over the implant, working with the precision that made him one of the most respected wildlife veterinarians in the state. The cub squirmed weakly, too young and exhausted to put up much resistance. "Almost there," Michael whispered, using the needle tip to leverage the foreign object toward the surface. A small drop of blood appeared, followed by the gleam of something metallic. With a final delicate maneuver, the device emerged, a sleek capsule smaller than Michael had imagined possible, its surface glinting with microscopic circuitry. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All 4 cubs simultaneously relaxed, their distress vanishing as if a switch had been flipped. Omega's breathing steadied, his tiny body going limp with relief in Emma's hands. Neural interface, Michael realized, studying the tiny device with horrified fascination. It was causing pain as a control mechanism. Emma's expression hardened with anger. Who would do this to a newborn animal? What kind of scientist? The kind who see living creatures as weapons, not beings with the capacity to suffer. came a voice from the darkness. They both jumped, Michael instinctively moving to shield the cubs as Navarro emerged from the shadows of the junipers. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, blood now soaking most of his shirt sleeve, but the pistol in his right hand remained steady. "You escaped," Michael said, relief warring with renewed suspicion. "Temporarily." Navarro's voice was strained, his complexion alarmingly pale even in the dim light. "They're regrouping, bringing in more personnel. You found the secondary implant, I see." "Just in time," Emma replied, her tone making it clear she shared Michael's uncertainty about where Navarro's loyalties truly lay. "Care to explain why only Omega has one?" "He's the priority specimen," Navarro answered, swaying slightly before bracing himself against a tree. "The others are valuable but replaceable. Omega represents the culmination of years of research." "Research you were part of," Michael pointed out, still protecting the cubs with his body. Navarro didn't deny it. "Yes, research I helped pioneer, to my eternal shame." He nodded toward the device Michael had extracted. "That neural implant connects directly to the pain centers in the brain. It can be activated remotely to control behavior, enforce compliance, punish resistance." "It's barbaric," Emma said. "It's effective," Navarro countered with clinical detachment that didn't quite mask his disgust. "And it's why they'll never stop hunting him. Omega isn't just genetically unique. He's proof that interspecies neural integration can work. The military applications alone are worth billions." Michael noticed fresh blood seeping through Navarro's fingers where he pressed them against his wound. "You need medical attention." "What I need is to get those cubs to safety before Chimera's recovery team finds us," Navarro replied, using his pistol to gesture toward the east. "There's a road 2 miles in that direction. I have a vehicle hidden there." "Chimera?" Emma asked. "The private military contractor that took over the project. They operate with impunity in multiple countries, using wildlife conservation as cover for genetic research that would be illegal in any regulated laboratory." Navarro's breathing had become labored, his words slightly slurred. "The mother Bobcat. They've already transported her to their primary facility in New Mexico. The cubs will follow unless we reach the extraction point by dawn." Michael exchanged a glance with Emma, a silent communication born of years working together. Neither fully trusted Navarro, but their options were rapidly dwindling. "And the extraction point is where exactly?" Michael asked. "People I trust," Navarro answered, his evasiveness doing nothing to inspire confidence. "People who can ensure these animals never become weapons." In the distance, the helicopter's searchlight had reversed direction, beginning to sweep back toward their position. Time was running out, forcing a decision based on incomplete information and uncertain trust. 2 miles east," Michael repeated, carefully returning the cubs to the incubator. "Lead the way." As they gathered their supplies and prepared to move, Michael pocketed the neural implant rather than destroying it. Evidence, he told himself, though of what crime and for what authorities he couldn't yet say. What had begun as a routine wildlife rescue had evolved into something far beyond his experience, with stakes higher than he could fully comprehend. One thing remained clear, however. The 4 tiny lives in the incubator deserved better than to become pawns in humanity's endless quest for more efficient ways to destroy itself. Whatever it took, whatever risks he had to take, Michael was determined to give them that chance. The forest had transformed from sanctuary to labyrinth, each shadow concealing potential threats, each sound amplifying their vulnerability. Navarro led the way, his movements becoming increasingly labored as blood loss took its toll. Michael and Emma followed with the transport incubator between them, its precious cargo now mercifully quiet, the cubs having fallen into exhausted sleep after their ordeal with the neural implant. "How much further?" Emma whispered after they'd been walking for nearly 40 minutes. The question wasn't merely about distance, Navarro's condition was deteriorating visibly, his pace slowing, his path occasionally weaving between trees. "Half-mile," he managed, pausing to lean against a pine trunk. "Follow the ridgeline down to a service road, vehicles hidden in a drainage culvert." Michael studied the older man with professional concern. "You need to stop and let me examine that wound." "No time," Navarro insisted, though he didn't resist when Michael set down his end of the incubator and approached. "Chimera's ground team will be expanding their search perimeter. We need to reach the road before dawn." Michael carefully peeled back the blood-soaked fabric covering Navarro's shoulder, revealing a deep furrow where a bullet had carved through muscle. "Through and through," he assessed. "But you've lost a lot of blood. You're going into shock." "Wouldn't be the first time," Navarro replied with grim humor. He reached into his pocket with his good hand, extracting a small auto-injector. "Synthetic hemoglobin and stimulants. Standard field kit for people in my line of work." The casual revelation of yet another piece of Navarro's mysterious background raised fresh questions. But Michael's immediate concern was keeping the man alive. He helped steady the injector as Navarro pressed it against his thigh. The device hissed softly, delivering its contents. "Give it 30 seconds, Navarro instructed, his voice already sounding marginally stronger as the powerful cocktail entered his system. Military grade, not FDA approved, but effective. Emma had been keeping watch, the incubator temporarily set on stable ground beside her. "I hear something," she warned, turning her head to triangulate the sound. "Engines, multiple vehicles." "They're mobilizing search teams," Navarro confirmed, pushing himself upright with renewed energy that seemed more chemical than natural. "We need to move, now." They resumed their trek, descending the ridgeline through increasingly sparse vegetation. The tree line ahead marked the boundary between forest and the open ground that would lead to the service road, a transition that would leave them exposed and vulnerable. "Wait," Navarro commanded as they approached the final trees. He scanned the open area, his experienced eye seeking any sign of ambush or surveillance. "I'll go first. If it's clear, I'll signal." Before they could object, he had slipped away, moving with the fluid grace of someone trained to remain unseen. Michael and Emma exchanged glances in the darkness. "Do you trust him?" Emma asked softly, her voice barely audible above the gentle sounds of the cub's breathing. Michael considered the question with the weight it deserved. "I trust that he wants these cubs away from Chimera. Beyond that," he shook his head. "His agenda is his own." "He knows too much about the project to be a simple defector," Emma observed. "The neural implant, the tracking systems, the military applications, he was deeply involved. Which makes his betrayal of the program either an act of redemption or something more calculated," Michael agreed. "Either way, he's our best chance of getting the cubs to safety right now." A flash of light from the tree line ahead, 3 quick pulses followed by 2 longer ones. Navarro's signal. They moved forward cautiously, Emma once again checking the cubs to ensure they remained stable during transport. They found Navarro crouched at the forest's edge, his enhanced strength already beginning to flag as the stimulants reached their peak effectiveness. "Road's clear," he reported. "Half a kilometer east. Follow the tree line as far as possible before crossing open ground." The journey to the road was tense but uneventful, the distant sounds of vehicles never materializing into direct threats. When they finally reached the service road, little more than a gravel track used by maintenance crews, Navarro led them to a large concrete drainage pipe running beneath the roadbed. Concealed within its shadow was a battered SUV with mud-covered license plates. "Help me with this," Navarro instructed, removing a camouflage tarp that had kept the vehicle hidden from aerial observation. Despite the synthetic stimulants, he was weakening again, his movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated. Michael helped secure the transport incubator in the SUV's rear compartment while Emma checked the cubs. "They'll need feeding soon," she reported. "The formula won't last much longer without proper refrigeration." "The extraction point has medical facilities," Navarro assured her, struggling to focus as he inserted the key into the ignition. "Everything they'll need." Michael placed a restraining hand on Navarro's arm. "You're in no condition to drive. I'll take the wheel." To his surprise, Navarro didn't argue, sliding across to the passenger seat with a grimace of pain. Whatever chemical boost he'd received was rapidly wearing off, leaving him pale and shaking. Michael started the engine, relieved to find the fuel tank nearly full. "Which way?" he asked, pulling onto the service road. "East to Highway 87, Navarro directed, then north toward the state line." Michael accelerated carefully, keeping the headlights off and navigating by moonlight. "You still haven't told us where exactly we're going." "Because I don't fully trust you either, Doctor," Navarro replied with unexpected candor. "Not with information that could compromise operational security." "Operational security," Emma repeated from the back seat, where she monitored the cubs. "You're military, aren't you? Or intelligence?" Navarro's laugh held no humor. "I was many things, Dr. Chen. Scientist, soldier, asset." He shifted painfully in his seat. "Now I'm just a man trying to correct mistakes before they become catastrophes." "These cubs," Michael pressed, sensing Navarro's increasing vulnerability might yield more truth than they'd gotten so far. "What made you decide to help them? Why betray your employers now?" Navarro was silent for so long that Michael thought he might have lost consciousness. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of personal history that transcended professional detachment. 18 months ago, I witnessed the termination of a failed test subject, a jaguar cub with genetic modifications similar to Omega's. The modifications were successful, but the cub showed unexpected behavioral patterns: aggression, resistance to commands, failure to bond with handlers. His voice grew distant, as if seeing it all again. The project director ordered euthanasia and dissection, standard protocol for non-compliant specimens. "And you participated," Emma said. "Not a question." "I did," Navarro acknowledged without attempting to justify himself. "I told myself it was necessary. Scientific advancement requires sacrifice, the greater good." He drew a shuddering breath. "Then I looked into that cub's eyes as the injection took effect. I saw awareness, understanding of what was happening to her. She knew." The SUV's tires crunched over gravel as Michael navigated a sharp turn, the service road finally connecting with a paved highway. He flipped on the headlights, the empty road stretching before them like a promise of escape. "That's when you started planning your exit," Michael guessed. "Not immediately. I'm ashamed to say it took more incidents before my conscience finally outweighed my ambition." Navarro's head rested against the window, his energy visibly draining. "But when we detected the mother Bobcat's labor complications through her tracking data, I saw an opportunity. I knew Chimera would monitor but not intervene immediately. Standard protocol for field test observation." "So you manufactured a reason to be in the area," Emma realized. "The Ocelot research visit was a cover." "Precisely. I anticipated your preserve would respond to a distressed wild animal. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Chimera would mobilize once they realized I was involved with the rescue." Navarro's eyes drifted closed, then opened with visible effort. "They know I've been accessing restricted data. They just don't know how much I've already leaked to people who can expose the entire operation." The revelation hung in the air as highway miles accumulated beneath their wheels. Dawn was breaking on the eastern horizon, pale light bleeding into the Texas sky as they crossed into the next county. "There's something else you should know," Navarro said after a long silence, his voice now barely above a whisper. Omega isn't just genetically unique. The neural implant you removed, it was there because he demonstrated capabilities in utero that frightened even Chimera's leadership. What kind of capabilities? Michael asked, unease prickling along his spine. Telepathic connection with his siblings and mother, rudimentary but measurable. Navarro's eyes locked with Michael's, deadly serious despite his weakened state. That's why all the cubs responded to his distress. It wasn't empathy, it was direct neural communication. He was broadcasting his pain, and they were receiving it. Emma gasped softly from the back seat. That's impossible. 6 months ago, I would have agreed with you, Navarro replied. Now I've seen the data. Chimera didn't just create a hybrid predator, Dr. Reeves. They've created something that could fundamentally change our understanding of interspecies communication. His head rolled toward the window again, strength fading. And they'll burn the world down to get him back. Highway miles blurred beneath their wheels as morning fully claimed the sky. Michael drove with single-minded focus, following Navarro's increasingly sporadic directions as the man drifted between consciousness and something deeper. In the back seat, Emma tended to the cubs, administering small amounts of formula when they woke, her scientific training temporarily set aside in favor of something more primal, the simple act of keeping vulnerable creatures alive. Turn here, Navarro murmured, rousing himself as they approached an unmarked dirt road cutting through scrubland. 2 miles, then left at the mesa formation. The SUV bounced over the uneven terrain, each jolt causing Navarro to wince despite his efforts to hide his pain. Michael navigated as carefully as possible, eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. So far, they appeared to have escaped Chimera's immediate search net, but experience told him that organizations with the resources Navarro described wouldn't abandon their quarry easily. You still haven't told us who we're meeting, Michael said, breaking the tense silence. If we're walking into another situation, we deserve to know. Navarro's eyes remained fixed on the horizon where a distinctive rock formation was becoming visible. Former colleagues, people who became uncomfortable with Chimera's methods and objectives. Scientists mostly who began this work with conservation goals before military applications took precedence. A resistance within the organization, Emma suggested from the back seat. More of an ethical oversight committee that Chimera never authorized, Navarro corrected with the ghost of a smile. Small, but with powerful connections in regulatory agencies and international conservation groups. The mesa loomed larger, its distinctive profile cutting against the morning sky like the prow of a massive stone ship. As directed, Michael turned left, following what appeared to be game trails rather than an actual road. Eventually, the terrain opened to reveal a cluster of low buildings nestled against the mesa's base, their adobe walls blending almost seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Stop here, Navarro instructed as they approached a metal gate set into a modest security fence. They'll have detection systems in place. As if confirming his words, 2 figures emerged from the nearest building, approaching with the cautious demeanor of people accustomed to threats. Both carried sidearms, though neither had drawn their weapons. That's Dr. Lynn Forrester. Navarro identified the taller figure, a woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Feline reproductive specialist. She was with the project from the beginning. The woman reached the gate first, her expression transforming from wariness to concern as she recognized Navarro's condition. She spoke rapidly into a communication device, then unlocked the gate to allow their vehicle through. Javier, she greeted as Michael stopped the SUV. Her accent was British, her manner brisk but not unkind. You look terrible. Hazard of defection, he replied weakly. These are Doctors Reeves and Chen from Broken Arrow Preserve. They have the cubs. Dr. Forrester's attention immediately shifted to the transport incubator visible in the back seat. All of them? Even Subject Omega? His name is Omega, not Subject, Michael corrected, protective instinct flaring. And yes, all 4 surviving cubs are here. Forrester's eyes widened fractionally. 4? Our intelligence indicated 5 cubs in utero. 1 male didn't survive the birth complications, Emma explained, her hand resting protectively on the incubator. The mother was severely dehydrated and suffering from placental abruption when we found her. A flash of genuine sorrow crossed Forrester's face. I'm sorry to hear that. Every life in this project is precious, despite what Chimera's leadership believes. She gestured toward the buildings. Please, bring them inside. We have proper medical facilities for both Javier and the cubs. Michael hesitated, still uncertain of their situation. And the mother? Navarro said she's been taken to a facility in New Mexico. We're working on locating her precisely, Forrester assured him. We have people inside Chimera's main research center. Once we confirm her location, extraction becomes possible. The second figure, a younger man with close-cropped hair and the watchful eyes of someone with military training, approached Navarro's side of the vehicle. Sir, we need to get you to medical immediately. The cubs first, Navarro insisted, though his voice had weakened to barely above a whisper. Then destroy this vehicle. It may have tracking devices we haven't detected. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The cubs were transferred to a state-of-the-art veterinary facility where a team of specialists immediately began comprehensive assessments. Navarro was whisked away for emergency treatment, leaving Michael and Emma to explain the events of the past 24 hours to Dr. Forrester and her colleagues. You removed the neural implant? Forrester asked, examining the tiny device Michael had preserved. Without surgical equipment? It was causing all of them distress, Michael explained. We had no choice. Forrester studied him with newfound respect. That was both incredibly dangerous and remarkably skilled. These devices are usually integrated with the central nervous system. Removal typically requires microsurgery. It was recently implanted, Emma suggested. Perhaps it hadn't fully bonded yet. Or perhaps Omega rejected it, came a new voice from the doorway. A tall, austere woman in a white lab coat entered, her badge identifying her as Dr. Helen Wycroft, Neurobiology. We've seen evidence of his system actively fighting foreign elements, even at the cellular level. His immune response is unprecedented. Michael and Emma spent the next several hours being debriefed by the facility's core team, a mix of scientists, former military personnel, and what appeared to be intelligence operatives, though none identified themselves as such explicitly. They learned that the operation to rescue the mother Bobcat was already in planning stages, with assets positioned near Chimera's New Mexico Research Center. What happens to the cubs now? Michael asked as the debriefing concluded. They had been shown to comfortable quarters and provided with fresh clothing, but he remained restless, concerned for both the cubs and what awaited them beyond this temporary sanctuary. They'll remain here under protection and observation, Dr. Forrester explained. This facility was originally designed for endangered species rehabilitation before Chimera repurposed much of our research. We're returning to those roots. And Omega? Given what he represents, what he can do. Forrester's expression grew contemplative. That's where we hope you might consider helping us, Dr. Reeves. We need someone with both wildlife veterinary expertise and ethical grounding to help guide his development. Someone who's already demonstrated a commitment to his welfare above political or scientific agendas. The proposal hung in the air, unexpected, yet somehow inevitable. Before Michael could formulate a response, a young technician appeared with news. Navarro was awake and asking to see them. They found him in the medical wing, pale but alert, his shoulder heavily bandaged. The clinical efficiency of his treatment suggested the facility maintained medical capabilities well beyond standard veterinary care. "You made it," he greeted them, his voice stronger than Michael had expected. "I wasn't certain I'd stay conscious long enough to get you here safely." "You did," Emma acknowledged. "The cubs are receiving excellent care." Navarro nodded, satisfaction momentarily overriding his pain. "And Chimera?" "Still searching the preserve and surrounding areas," Forrester reported. "They don't yet know you've left Texas. It gives us a window of opportunity." "For what?" Michael asked. "To prepare for what comes next," Navarro replied with surprising gravity. "Chimera won't abandon their investment easily. They have governmental contracts worth billions riding on the success of this program." "So this isn't over," Emma realized. "Far from it," Forrester confirmed. "But you've given us something invaluable: time and hope. With Omega and his siblings safe, we can begin gathering the evidence needed to expose Chimera's illegal operations while protecting the cubs from exploitation." As if on cue, Dr. Wycroft entered with a tablet displaying live video feed from the veterinary unit. The 4 cubs had been placed in a specialized enclosure, mimicking a natural den, their tiny bodies huddled together in sleep. Even through the digital image, Michael could see their improved condition, properly hydrated, their fur beginning to fluff as it dried completely, vital signs strong and steady. "They're fighters," Wycroft observed, "especially Omega. His neural activity is unlike anything I've ever recorded in a feline species." Navarro's expression softened as he looked at the sleeping cubs. "They deserve more than to become weapons or laboratory specimens. They deserve a chance to be what they are: remarkable living beings with their own intrinsic value." The sentiment struck Michael deeply, resonating with his core beliefs about wildlife conservation. Throughout his career, he had fought against the commodification of wild animals, their reduction to resources or obstacles, rather than autonomous creatures deserving of respect and protection. "The mother," he said suddenly, returning to his most pressing concern. "When do we go after her?" Forrester and Navarro exchanged glances that contained volumes of unspoken communication. "We," Forrester repeated with emphasis. "So you're with us then?" Michael looked at Emma, finding in her determined expression the same resolve he felt crystallizing within himself. What had begun as a routine wildlife rescue had evolved into something far beyond their normal professional boundaries, yet the fundamental mission remained unchanged: protect the vulnerable, preserve what was wild and free, stand against those who would exploit nature's remarkable diversity for selfish ends. "Yes," he answered simply. "We're with you." In the veterinary unit nestled among his siblings, Omega stirred in his sleep. His tiny paws twitched, his unique coat pattern catching the light as he shifted position. Born of human intervention, yet embodying nature's endless capacity for adaptation and resilience, he represented both warning and promise, a living testament to humanity's power to manipulate life and the profound responsibility that came with such power. The battle for his future and that of his family had only just begun. But for this moment, watched over by those committed to his welfare, he slept the peaceful sleep of the protected, wild heart beating steadily beneath spotted fur, his extraordinary journey just beginning.